All right, for the fantasy perspective, welcome two-time fantasy analyst of the year, Jamey Eisenberg. Jamey, Deebo Samuel gets his deal here. His quarterback is Trey Lance. How might that impact his value this season?
Yeah, there's a lot of things that could impact his value here, and obviously he's valuable now to the 49ers. But I think you look at not just Trey Lance, but, a lot of his production came last year, as you mentioned, being a do-it-all threat. And I think, part of this contract negotiation and obviously the trade demands that we heard about this offseason, where I don't think he wants to be used in the same role. The 49ers using a third-round pick on a running back, and Tyrion Davis-Price, I think, wants to get another body back there to sort of help their backfield. Remember, Elijah Mitchell missed 6 games last season due to injury. But you got George Kittle back healthy. We saw some of Deebo's numbers pop last season when Kittle was off the field. And obviously Brandon Ayuk being in the doghouse early in the season. And then when he was finally back in the good graces of Kyle Shanahan, we saw Deebo's numbers from a receiving perspective sort of dip a little bit. Ayuk was actually more targeted down the stretch from Jimmy Garoppolo. So you have a lot of things at play here, but clearly he's just an amazing player. If you just take away his rushing numbers, he was still a top 10 fantasy wide receiver. So there's a lot to love about Deebo. It's just a matter of how much you love him when you want to draft him. For me, I'm looking at him early round 3, and I'm probably not going to get him because it's going to be a second-round pick.
Okay, so you've got him perhaps in the second round, and I know his average draft position is 22.4, so a second-round pick there would be Deebo Samuel in terms of his average place in your fantasy draft. When you look at the numbers, and you kind of touched on it here with the current construction of the roster, do you think that he can get anywhere near what he did last season?
I don't think so. I think it's probably because he doesn't want to do that same thing again. They also needed him last year. Again, Raheem Mostert injured in the first quarter of last season. Mitchell missing 6 games last season, not trusting Trey Sermon. And so you have a better Sermon. You have hopefully a healthy Mitchell, and you have another body back there, 2 bodies back there. Jeff Wilson also was banged up. He's competing for the second job there behind Mitchell as well. So I think with also Trey Lance and his ability to run, you cut those rushing numbers in half. And so will he be as successful as a passer? Well, we saw in the 2 starts that Trey Lance made last season, his numbers were down a little bit as a receiver. And so I think we'll see, again, a distribution of targets that's going to be a little bit different, a distribution of touches and carries that are going to be a little bit different for Deebo. So he's actually a bust candidate for me because of what you said, his average draft position in round 2. Now, we're splitting hairs a little bit. This is always a fun fantasy conversation. I won't take him in round 2, but I'll take him in round 3. So he's still going to be a very good player, but he's just not somebody I'm going to pay up for. I don't want to take him at his ceiling. I'm going to take him more closer to where I think he's going to finish, which to me is closer to the number 12 wide receiver as opposed to a top 5 guy like he was last year.
So you are basically here, you're warning fantasy managers when they draft Deebo Samuel because you think his production will go down based on what that lineup will look like this season. So what's the advice here then for fantasy managers, their biggest takeaway when they look at Deebo Samuel in a draft?
Yeah, it's just, again, it comes down to how comfortable are you taking him in the second round. And typically what we're seeing is the group of wide receivers, running backs, and tight ends that he's going in the same neighborhood as. And so for me, I'm going to take CeeDee Lamb over him, for example. I'm going to take guys like Michael Pittman, which is a bit of a surprise if you hear that name as the Colts' number 1 wide receiver, but I just think he's got a higher ceiling just as a pass catcher. He's in the same neighborhood for me as A.J. Brown, as Tyreek Hill. I think he's at the bottom of that group, to be honest with you, but I still think he's a very good player. This isn't necessarily to say avoid Deebo Samuel. It's just a matter of, do you take him in round 2 or do you let somebody else reach for him in round 2 with some of the running backs that'll be going there? Leonard Fournette, Aaron Jones. I like Saquon Barkley this year, Mark Andrews, So there are a lot of guys in that 22 spot, between 20 and 25 when you get to the beginning of the 3rd round that I just think are better players, have a little bit higher ceiling. So again, it's just a matter of how comfortable you are taking Deebo Samuel. The thing when you get a player like this is you don't want to take them to expect the exact same thing. He was an anomaly last year, something that we just don't see very often. The guy getting that much production as a running back, still being as successful as a pass catcher, changing quarterback, guys coming back healthy around him. It just feels like there's going to be a little bit of a decline. I hope it's not a steep decline, but again, he's just not somebody that I'm chasing this year in fantasy drafts. He's somebody more than I'm settling for, and again, I'm not getting him based on his ADP.
All right, so Jamey Eisenberg says temper your extensions with the guy that just got paid, Deebo Samuel. 3 years, a deal worth nearly $74 million, 58 guaranteed. Jamey, appreciate the perspective here on CBS Sports HQ. And hey, you want to dominate your league? You dominate your league with information and insight from guys like Jamey Eisenberg, Adam Azer, Dave Richard, Heath Cumming. Fantasy Football Today, first episode, noon Eastern on Monday. Send them your questions via Twitter, #AskFFT.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.